All right, so this is the scavenger hunt, and I dropped it. I'm going to drop it. I have not yet. I'm going to drop this into the Google Classroom, and so you can print it off if you want. But I know some of you are not going to be able to print it off, so do what you can. Okay, so what is happening here is they're going to give you a problem, and then you're going to take that problem and see which one it matches with. Okay, so we don't know the answer to this. This is going to be more like what you do in your 1450 class. So I would take out those identity pages because I'm going to reference it. For example, like one of your identities, let me just go into what I'm saying. So if I go into my identities pages, I have an identity that tells me what the cotangent is. If I can get to it. Okay, not there. There. Cotangent is the cosine over the sine. Okay, so I'm going to come into here, and the cotangent is the cosine over the sine. So it looked kind of scary, but then if you look, don't these two things cancel? And you're left with the cosine of x, which means that's h. So in 1450, they're not going to give you what the answer is supposed to be. They're just going to give you what the problem is, and you have to simplify. Okay, so we're going to h, which is the next one. So I would like you to pause this and see if you can figure this one out. This one is not as bad. Pause, try it. All right, so I'm going to FOIL. So I'd have 1 minus the cosine of x plus the cosine of x minus the cosine of x squared. These things are going to cancel in the middle, so I get 1 minus the cosine squared of x. So again, I'm going to go to my page that has my ratios, and it's 1 minus, okay, I don't have 1 minus the cosine squared, but I could make it. Right there, 1 minus the cosine squared is the sine squared. So if I go into here, 1 minus the cosine squared is the sine squared of x. So my answer is B. Okay. I'm going to do this one with you. This is one of the reasons I like the answers. If you look at the answers, they're all secants and cosecants. So I'm going to rewrite these as secants and cosecants. So I'm going to go back to here because we're going to have to do a little manipulation. If I do the cotangent is the cosine over the sine, wouldn't I also know that the cotangent, like if I use this, is the cosecant over the secant? Don't I know that if I use these, the cotangent is the flip? So it's the cosecant over the secant. So I'm going to have to cosecant over the secant. These are hard to remember. Cosecant over the secant. And if I go back into that page, and I'm just using these identities, which you do not have to memorize, the tangent is the secant over the cosecant. Okay, so I could go from here and I could get common denominators. All right, so my common denominator would be the cosecant A secant A and the cosecant A secant A. So I'm going to use my green again. This first one's missing the cosecant of A. So that would be the cosecant squared of A. This one's missing the secant of A. And that's the secant squared of A. And so on the top, I would have the cosecant squared of A plus the secant squared of A over this stuff. Cosecant of A, secant of A, right? Cosecant of A, secant of A. Yes, no, maybe? Okay, so I'm going to go out here to my list. Cosecant of A plus the secant of A. Cosecant of A plus the secant of A. I do not have that. I do know the secant squared is 1, and I do know like this, I could use these. Okay, so I know I'm going to do this in class, and this is going to annoy you, but I just went through this, and I don't have anything with that. So I'm literally, you could be mad at me, but that's why I said don't work this one on your own. This one is a hard one. I don't know that I would give you this one. I'm going to go a different method because that looks like it's going to be painful. Okay, so I'm going to go this method. What about the cotangent? Isn't that 1 over the tangent? So now my common denominator, this looks a little easier. This looks maybe I'm going to get somewhere. So this is going to be, this is good. Use my green. It's good. It's got the tangent. This one is missing the tangent. So the top would be the tangent squared of A. So I'd have 1 plus the tangent squared of A over the tangent of A. Okay, so let's take a look at this. 1 plus the tangent squared. 1 plus the tangent squared is the secant squared. So this is the secant squared of A over the tangent. That is not even an option, but at least I got something better. And I know this is what's frustrating to kids. Like, you just have to kind of guess. So I'm going to rewrite these. Okay, this is secant. I'm going to rewrite the tangent with a secant in it because maybe something will happen here. The tangent with a secant in it, tangent with the secant in it is the secant over the cosecant. So this is the secant over the cosecant, right? So wouldn't I multiply by the reciprocal? One of these secants is going to cancel with one of those and leave me with the secant of A times the cosecant of A. Wow, that one was a doozy. Okay, and we did it wrong the first way. And I'm going to do that in class as well. Like, you're going to have to sometimes just erase. That is these problems. They are not easy. Okay, this one is not that bad. I'm going to give you a hint. I would write them all as sines and cosines and see what cancels. So go ahead and pause and write them all as sines and cosines and see what happens. Okay, when it's multiplying, it's a little easier. So pause and try it. So secant is 1 over the cosine. Cotangent is the cosine over the sine. And I looked at my paper. And then this is going to be the sine of A over 1. So don't those divide to 1? Don't those divide to 1? So aren't you just left with 1? Right? So if you write them all, that's way easier than the one we just did. This one that we did here, I would not give you on a test. This is a pre-calculus college question, but it doesn't hurt you to try it. Okay, same thing on this one. I do not think this is that bad. I would write them all as sines and cosines when it's multiplying. Pause and try it. Pause and try it. Okay, so I'm going to write them all as sines and cosines. So the secant is the 1 over the cosine, and the cosecant is 1 over the sine. So this sine is going to cancel with one of those and leave me with the sine of theta over the cosine of theta, which isn't one of my options. But if I go to my thing, sine of theta over the cosine is the tangent. So I'm going to go back into here, and this is the tangent of theta. Okay. All right, this one is a little harder. I would like you to pause it and see kind of what you can do with it. It is a harder question, just so you're aware. Try it. Okay, I would definitely multiply in. So like if you had 3 times 1/3 times 5, aren't the 3 times 1/3 going to cancel because they're reciprocals and just leave you with 5? So tangent times cotangent is going to be 1, so this is going to be the cosine of x. And then if I times this in here, it's going to be plus the sine of x times the tangent of x. Well, okay, you can't add those together. So I'm going to rewrite the tangent as the sine of x over the cosine of x. So then wouldn't this be the sine of x squared over the cosine of x? And if I write this over 1, I can get a common denominator. The first one's okay. This one's missing a cosine. So you'd have a cosine squared of x. So you'd have the cosine squared of x plus the sine squared of x over the cosine of x. So this is one that is on your sheet. It's 1. And 1 over the cosine of x is the secant of x. This one is harder than anything on the test. This is an example of a college question. So I kind of mixed them. All right, so try this, guy. See what you can do. This one is not terrible. You just have to do some thinking first. Pause. All right, I'm going to mess with this. I kind of recognize this. You start doing enough of these, you start to recognize it. 1 minus the cosine squared. Okay, I know it's got to be one of these. Let me just delete all this crap. 1 minus the cosine squared. So if I took this, wouldn't this be 1 minus the cosine squared? So 1 minus the cosine squared is the sine squared. So I'm going to go back in here, and this is the sine squared. Now, I'm going to rewrite them all. So I know the tangent is the sine over the cosine. And you can look at your paper. So then I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So one of these would go with one of those, and I'd have the sine of x times the cosine of x. This one I would give you on the test, but it would be a harder question. I think this is doable. It's not undoable. All right. This one is a doozy, okay? So I'm going to first start by doing common denominators. I didn't even say pause, because this would be one that would be harder than the test. Cosine of b, sine of b. Okay? If you look at this, this is going to get really ugly. This is missing the sine. Okay, wait, hold on. Sine times cosecant is 1. This is missing the cosine. So this would be the cosine squared. Okay, we just did this one, right? 1 minus the cosine squared of b. Okay, we just did this one on this last page. 1 minus the cosine squared is the sine squared. So this ends up being the sine squared of b over the cosine of b, sine of b. So one of these is going to cancel with one of those and leave you with the sine of b over the cosine of b. Well, if you look at your sheet, that is the tangent. This one is harder than the one on the test, but I don't think it's crazy hard. You just have to get common denominators. Okay. All right. So on this one, I'm going to have you pause. This is one I think you should be able to do. This would be on the test. Try it. Okay. So you have common. So I'm going to take that out in front. I'm going to factor. So that's 1 minus the cosine squared of x. Okay. You start seeing this. We just did this one on the last two problems. That is the sine squared of x. Well, what is anything times its reciprocal? 1. Anything times its reciprocal is 1. Okay. All right, last one. I think you should be able to do this one too. You need to FOIL. So I'd have 1 times 1 minus the sine of theta plus the sine of theta minus the sine squared of theta. Those cancel. And if you look at this, this is the cosine squared of theta. This I definitely would give you on the test. Okay, so these are examples. Try the best you can on them.